The carriage wheels had long since stopped their rhythmic clatter against the mountain road when Dame Elspeth Craven opened her eyes to darkness. Pain radiated through her left side, sharp and insistent, a reminder that at 84 years of age, the body no longer forgave accidents as it might have in youth. She could taste copper on her tongue and feel the sticky warmth of blood matting her silver hair against her temple. The overturned carriage lay somewhere behind her in the ravine, her driver presumably dead, though she had not seen him since the horses had panicked at the sound of wolves howling in the forest. She had been travelling to the monastery at Bistrita, a final pilgrimage before her inevitable end. The physicians in London had given her 6 months, perhaps less. The growth in her abdomen would see to that. But Elspeth had not feared death. She had lived a long life, a proper life, a life of duty and devotion to God and to the memory of her parents. She had never married, never known the touch of a man, never allowed herself the frivolous indulgences that had led so many other women to ruin. She had been proud of that once. Lately, in the long nights when sleep would not come, she had begun to wonder if pride had been all she had truly possessed. The sound of voices pulled her from her thoughts. Romanian, fast, and fearful. She understood only fragments from her months of travel through this strange and superstitious land. Hands lifted her, rough but not unkind, and she found herself looking into the weathered face of a peasant woman whose eyes were wide with something beyond mere concern, terror perhaps, or pity. They carried her not to the village she could see glowing in the valley below, but up the mountain path, higher into the darkness where the mist clung to ancient pine trees, like the fingers of the dead. Elspeth tried to protest, but her voice emerged as little more than a whisper, lost in the wind that howled through the peaks. She caught phrases in their hurried conversation. Castle, night, no choice. The words tumbled over each other, punctuated by the sign of the cross that each villager made repeatedly as they climbed. The fortress emerged from the fog, like a vision from a medieval manuscript, all sharp towers and crumbling battlements, silhouetted against a moon so full and bright it seemed to mock the darkness surrounding it. Elspeth had seen castles before, had toured the great estates of England and Scotland in her youth, when her father had still hoped she might make an advantageous match, but those had been monuments to power and wealth, testaments to human ambition. This place felt different. This place felt hungry. The villagers deposited her before a massive iron-bound door and fled without ceremony, their footsteps echoing down the mountain path with desperate speed. Elspeth lay on the cold stone, her travelling cloak insufficient against the chill, and wondered if she would die here on this threshold, alone as she had lived. It seemed a fitting end, perhaps. God's judgment on a life half-lived, a heart half-opened, a soul that had chosen safety over passion at every turn. The door opened without sound, which was somehow more terrible than if it had groaned on rusty hinges. A figure stood framed in the entrance, tall and impossibly still, dressed in black that seemed to absorb what little light the moon provided. For a long moment neither spoke. Elspeth found herself staring up into a face that was at once beautiful and terrible, ageless, yet burdened with the weight of centuries. His eyes, when they met hers, were dark as the space between stars, and in them she saw something she had not expected to find in this cursed place. Sadness, ancient, boundless, and utterly human. "You are injured." The voice was cultured, the English perfect though coloured with an accent she could not quite place. Eastern European certainly, but refined by time and education into something that belonged to no single nation. He did not ask a question. He stated a fact, as one might comment on the weather or the position of the moon. Elspeth tried to sit up and failed, her breath catching as the pain in her side flared white-hot. The figure moved then, faster than her eyes could follow, and she found herself being lifted with a gentleness that seemed at odds with the strength required to raise her, as if she weighed nothing at all. She caught the scent of old parchment and older wine, of dust and blood and something indefinably cold, like the air in a tomb opened after centuries of darkness. He carried her through corridors that seemed to stretch impossibly far into the mountain itself, past tapestries whose images she could not quite make out in the dim light of candles that burned with flames too still and too pale to be entirely natural. She should have been terrified. She understood that somewhere in the rational part of her mind that had governed her choices for 8 decades, but terror required energy she no longer possessed, and more than that, it required the belief that she had something left to lose. The room where he laid her was surprisingly warm, a fire burning in a hearth large enough to roast an ox. The bed was vast and ancient, its posts carved with images of dragons and wolves intertwined in an endless dance. He set her down on coverings of velvet and fur that had not seen use in what must have been decades, judging by the dust that rose in small clouds around her. Yet despite their age, they were not rotted or moth-eaten. Everything in this place seemed suspended somehow, caught between decay and preservation, between death and a mockery of life. Your wounds require attention. He stood at the foot of the bed, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture of such formal correctness that it might have been amusing under other circumstances. I have some knowledge of medicine, though I confess it has been many years since I have had cause to practice on one of the living. One of the living. The phrase hung in the air between them like smoke. Elspeth found her voice at last, though it emerged rough and strained. "Where am I? Who are you?" A slight smile touched his lips. There and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "You are in Castle Dracula, and I am its master, the last of my line and the keeper of its many secrets. As for who I am, I suspect the villagers who brought you here have already provided an answer to that question, though whether you choose to believe their superstitions is, of course, your own affair. Count Dracula." The name fell from her lips without conscious thought, and she saw something flicker in those dark eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or weariness at being named, at being known, at being feared. The very same. He moved to a cabinet against the wall and began removing items with the practiced efficiency of one who has performed the same task countless times before. Bandages, clean and white, despite their obvious age. A basin of water that steamed gently, though there was no fire near it to warm it. Bottles of liquids whose purposes she could only guess at. When he returned to her side, he paused, and for the first time she heard something like uncertainty in his voice. "I must examine your injuries. I will be as gentle as I can, but I fear there will be some pain. May I proceed?" The question surprised her. She had expected many things from this encounter, assuming she had expected anything at all from a meeting with a figure from legend and nightmare. But courtesy, genuine concern for her comfort and dignity, these had not been among them. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and watched as he began to carefully remove her traveling clothes, cutting away the fabric where it had stuck to wounds with a blade that appeared in his hand and vanished again so quickly she could not say where he had drawn it from. His touch was cool but not unpleasant as he examined the gash along her ribs, the bruising that spread across her left side in shades of purple and black, the smaller cuts that covered her arms and face. He worked in silence, cleaning each wound with a solution that stung like fire, but left a strange numbness in its wake. She watched his face as he worked, noting the concentration there, the slight furrow between his dark brows, the way his jaw tightened when she could not entirely suppress a gasp of pain. "You are fortunate." 3 ribs cracked but not broken through. The head wound is superficial despite the bleeding. These cuts will heal clean if infection does not set in. He began wrapping her ribs with the bandages, his movements practiced and sure. "You will live, Dame Elspeth Craven, though I suspect you knew that already." She stared at him, momentarily speechless. "How do you know my name? Your bags survived the accident. The driver did not, I am sorry to say. The wolves saw to that before I could intervene. I had them brought here along with you. Among your possessions I found letters addressed to you, as well as papers indicating your intended destination. A pilgrimage to Bistrita, to seek absolution before the end." His eyes met hers again, and she saw that sadness once more, deeper now and edged with something that might have been understanding. "The physicians have given you a death sentence. 6 months, perhaps less. Cancer, they suspect, though they cannot be certain without opening you up, and at your age they fear you would not survive the procedure." Elspeth felt tears prick at her eyes, though whether from pain or the strange intimacy of having her deepest secret spoken aloud by this creature of darkness, she could not say. "Yes, 6 months, perhaps less. I thought to make my peace with God before the end. And have you made your peace?" The question was soft, almost gentle, but it struck her with the force of a blow. Had she? She had spent 84 years being good, being proper, being dutiful. She had denied herself every pleasure, every passion, every moment of spontaneous joy in service to an idea of righteousness that now, in the shadow of death, seemed as insubstantial as morning mist. She had never stolen, never lied unless absolutely necessary, never raised her voice in anger or her hand in violence. She had also never danced until her feet ached, never sung for the pure joy of it, never felt a lover's touch, or known the weight of a child in her arms. "I do not know." The words came unbidden, honest in a way she had not allowed herself to be in decades. I thought I had. I thought I had lived as I should, as God intended. But now, here at the end, I find myself wondering if perhaps I have wasted the gift I was given. A life unlived is perhaps a greater sin than one lived poorly. Dracula finished securing the bandages and moved to wash his hands in the basin, the water turning pink with her blood. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of ages, of experiences beyond her comprehension, of centuries spent in the twilight between life and death. I have seen much in my long existence, Dame Elspeth. I have watched kingdoms rise and fall, seen empires crumble to dust and new ones emerge from the ashes. I have known pleasure and pain beyond mortal comprehension, have felt the ecstasy of power and the agony of absolute solitude. And in all that time, across all those years, I have learned one truth that seems to hold regardless of whether one is living or undead, mortal or immortal, blessed or damned. He turned to face her, and in the firelight she could see the lines of his face more clearly, the sharp planes and angles that spoke of aristocratic breeding, the mouth that was at once cruel and kind, the eyes that had witnessed horrors and wonders in equal measure. Regret is the only true immortality. It outlasts the body, outlasts memory itself. The things we did not do, the words we did not speak, the chances we did not take, these are the ghosts that haunt us far more thoroughly than any spectre of folklore. You fear you have wasted your life, but at least you have the clarity to recognize it before the end. That is more than most achieve. Elspeth felt something crack open inside her chest, some wall she had built so carefully over so many years, brick by careful brick. Is that why you are as you are? Because of regret? A shadow passed over his features, there and gone like clouds across the moon. I am as I am because of choices made long ago, choices born of pride and rage, and a refusal to accept the natural order of things. But yes, if I am honest, and I find myself strangely inclined to honesty in your presence, regret has been my most constant companion these many centuries. I regret the man I was, the monster I became, the countless lives I have taken or ruined in my hunger and my loneliness. Most of all, I regret that I have forgotten how to be anything other than this cursed thing I have become. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. If anything, Elspeth found it oddly peaceful, as if in acknowledging their respective failures and regrets, they had created a space where pretense was no longer necessary. The fire crackled in the hearth, and somewhere in the depths of the castle a wolf howled, the sound echoing through stone corridors like a lament. Finally, Dracula stirred. You need rest. Your body has suffered a considerable trauma, and at your age, recovery will not be swift. You will remain here until you are strong enough to continue your journey, or until such time as you wish to leave. You are my guest, and as such, you are under my protection. No harm will come to you within these walls. He moved toward the door, and Elspeth found herself speaking before she could consider whether it was wise to do so. Thank you for your kindness, for your honesty. I did not expect to find either in this place. He paused at the threshold, his hand on the ancient wood of the door, and when he looked back at her, there was something in his expression that might have been surprise or gratitude, or simply the reflection of his own loneliness, recognized in another. Sleep well, Dame Elspeth Craven. We will speak again when you have rested. I find myself curious to learn more about a woman who would journey alone into these mountains, seeking absolution at the end of her life. There is courage in that, whatever else you may believe about the life you have lived. And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with the softest of sounds, leaving her alone in the firelit room with her thoughts and her pain, and the strange, impossible comfort of having been truly seen for the first time in longer than she could remember. Outside, the wolves continued their chorus, and the moon rode high and cold above the castle, illuminating nothing and revealing less. Elspeth closed her eyes, and against all reason and expectation, felt something she had not known in years settle over her like a blanket. Not quite hope, not yet, but perhaps the possibility of it. The sense that even here, even now, even in the house of death itself, there might still be something worth discovering before the final darkness fell. Sleep claimed her gently, and for the first time in months she did not dream of graves and empty churches, and a God whose face she could no longer quite remember. Instead, she dreamed of candlelight and conversations yet to come, of dark eyes that held centuries of sorrow, and of the curious sensation that in coming to the end of her life, she might finally be about to discover how to begin living. Elspeth woke to find sunlight streaming through the tall windows, pale and cold as it filtered through the mountain mist. For a moment she lay confused, her mind struggling to reconcile the ornate ceiling above her with any place she knew. Then memory returned along with pain, though the latter was somewhat dulled from the night before. She shifted carefully, testing her injuries, and found that while movement remained difficult, it was not impossible. A knock at the door startled her. It opened before she could respond, revealing not the Count but a woman of indeterminate age, her dark hair streaked with grey and pulled back severely from a face that might once have been beautiful. She carried a tray laden with food, and her eyes when they met Elspeth's were wary but not unkind. "The master said you would need sustenance." The woman's English was heavily accented but clear. "I am Magda. I keep the castle as best as one can keep a place like this." She set the tray on a table near the bed, her movements economical and practiced. "There is bread, cheese, fruit preserved from last autumn, and tea. The master does not eat such things anymore, but he remembers what the living require." Elspeth struggled to sit up, gasping as her ribs protested. Magda was beside her in an instant, helping to arrange pillows behind her back, her touch gentle despite the roughness of her work-worn hands. "Thank you," Elspeth managed when she could breathe properly again. "How long have you served him?" "The Count?" A shadow passed over Magda's face. "Since I was a girl. My grandmother served before me, and her mother before that. We are bound to this place, to him, by ties older than memory. It is not always a burden. He is not cruel as masters go. He does not take from the village as he once did. He keeps his hunger confined to travellers and those who would seek him out with violence in their hearts. It is an arrangement of sorts. We provide what service he requires and he leaves our families in peace. But you remain. You could leave, surely. Go to the cities, to Bucharest or Vienna. Make a life away from this darkness." Magda's smile was sad and knowing. "Could I? Perhaps once when I was young and still believed the world beyond these mountains held something better. But I am old now, and this place is all I know. Besides, where would I go? What would I do? I am the keeper of a vampire's castle, the tender of his darkness. That is not a skill that translates well to other employment." She moved toward the door, then paused. "He spoke of you this morning, before he retired to his chambers to escape the day. Said you were different from the others who have found their way here. Said you looked at him without fear or hatred, only curiosity and a strange kind of understanding. That has not happened in a very long time. Be careful, Dame Elspeth. Even monsters can form attachments, and those rarely end well for the mortal involved." Before Elspeth could formulate a response, Magda was gone, leaving her alone with her breakfast and her thoughts. She ate slowly, surprised to find herself hungry despite everything. The bread was dark and dense, the cheese sharp, the preserved fruit sweet enough to make her teeth ache. The tea was strong and bitter, and exactly what she needed. As she ate, she studied the room more carefully in the daylight. The furnishings were old, centuries old perhaps, but maintained with obvious care. The wood of the bed frame gleamed with polish. The tapestries on the walls showed no signs of moth damage. The floor was clean despite the dust she had noticed the night before. It was as if someone had kept this room ready, waiting for a guest that had never come, tending it year after year out of hope or habit or simple refusal to let one more thing fall into decay. When she had finished eating, Elspeth found that curiosity outweighed caution. Moving carefully, she eased herself out of bed and discovered that someone had left a dressing gown laid across a chair near the hearth. It was too large for her diminished frame, clearly meant for someone taller, but it was warm and clean and she wrapped it around herself gratefully. The fire had burned down to embers, yet the room remained comfortable, another small impossibility in a place that seemed to run on them. She made her way to the windows and looked out over a landscape of stark beauty. The castle perched on the edge of a precipice, with the mountains rising behind it and the forested valley spreading below. In the daylight, she could see the village where her erstwhile rescuers lived, small and huddled as if trying to make itself invisible. Beyond it, the road wound away toward civilization, toward the world of the living, toward everything she had known before yesterday's accident had delivered her to this threshold between life and death. "You should not be out of bed." The voice came from behind her, and she turned too quickly, gasping as pain shot through her side. Dracula stood in the doorway, though she had not heard it open. In the pale morning light he looked different, less the gothic villain of penny dreadfuls and more like a man, or what a man might be after centuries of existence had worn away everything superfluous. He wore a dark suit of old-fashioned cut, immaculate despite its age, and his hair was pulled back and tied with a ribbon in a style that had not been common for 100 years or more. I could not remain abed any longer. Elspeth moved slowly back toward the bed, accepting defeat. Her body was not yet ready for adventures, it seemed. The morning is too beautiful to waste in sleep. He moved into the room with that uncanny grace she had noted the night before, neither fast nor slow, but simply there, as if he existed slightly outside the normal flow of time. Beautiful is not a word I would have chosen for it. Harsh, perhaps. Unforgiving. These mountains do not suffer weakness gladly. Yet you remain here century after century. There must be something that keeps you beyond mere habit. Dracula was silent for a long moment, his gaze turning to the window, to the view she had been admiring. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost contemplative. I remain because I am bound here by choices made so long ago that even my memories of them have grown thin and uncertain. I remain because this castle is all that is left of what I was before I became what I am. I remain because to leave would be to admit that I have become nothing more than the monster the world believes me to be, and I am too proud or too foolish to accept that final defeat. He turned back to her, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression, quickly hidden but there nonetheless. You asked Magda about her service here. She told you, I presume, that her family has served mine for generations. What she perhaps did not tell you is that they stay not out of fear but out of a contract made when my mortal family still ruled these lands with honor rather than horror. They stay because I keep my word, and because even now, even as I am, I honor the old agreements. It is perhaps the last thread connecting me to the man I once was. Elspeth sank onto the edge of the bed, her strength failing. What were you? Before? A warrior? A prince? A defender of Christendom against the Ottoman tide? I fought for God and country, and believed absolutely in the righteousness of my cause. She could hear the bitterness in his words, the self-loathing barely contained. I killed in his name and called it holy. I impaled my enemies and called it justice. I waded through rivers of blood and believed myself blessed for it. And when I fell in battle, when I lay dying in the mud with my life draining away, I raged against the injustice of it. I had served faithfully, had given everything, and this was my reward. Death and darkness and the worms. He moved to the window, his back to her now, his voice barely above a whisper. So, I made a different choice. When the dark powers offered me a way to continue, to take my revenge on a god who had abandoned me, and an enemy who had defeated me, I accepted. I drank from the cup of damnation willingly, eagerly, and in doing so, I became something far worse than any Ottoman soldier. I became the monster that mothers use to frighten children, the nightmare that haunts the faithful, the proof that even the most righteous can fall if their pride is great enough. The silence that followed was heavy with centuries of guilt and regret. Elspeth found herself thinking of her own life, her own choices, her own sins of omission, if not commission. How different were they, really? She had not chosen to become a vampire, but she had chosen a kind of death nonetheless. A slow death of the spirit, a gradual withdrawal from life and all its messy, dangerous, beautiful possibilities. We are not so different, you and I. She spoke quietly, not wanting to break the strange intimacy of the moment. You chose darkness out of pride and rage. I chose emptiness out of fear. Both of us have spent our lives, or your eternity, refusing to be vulnerable, to be truly alive in the fullest sense. Both of us have paid a terrible price for that refusal. Dracula turned to look at her, and she saw surprise in his dark eyes. You do not condemn me, how can I? I who have wasted the gift of mortal life just as surely as you destroyed it. At least you have passion, even if it is twisted into something dark. I have nothing but regrets, and the hollow satisfaction of having always done what was proper. She felt tears pricking at her eyes again, that damnable weakness of old age. I am 84 years old, and I have never been with anyone. Not in the way you mean when you speak of that, not in any way that matters. I have never loved, never been loved, never allowed myself the terrifying joy of opening my heart to another soul. I thought I was being righteous. Now I think perhaps I was just being a coward. The words hung in the air between them, naked and raw. She had not meant to speak them, had not meant to confess her deepest shame to this creature of legend and nightmare. But somehow in this place outside the normal world, in the presence of someone who could not judge her because he had committed sins so much greater, the truth had simply spilled out. Dracula crossed the room and, to her astonishment, knelt beside the bed so that his eyes were level with hers. His hand reached out, hesitated, then gently took hers. His skin was cool but not unpleasantly so, and his touch was reverent, as if she were something precious and fragile. "That is why you came here, is it not? Not just to seek absolution for your sins, but to rage against a life unlived, to stand before God and demand an accounting for why you were given a heart if you were never meant to use it." "Yes." The word came out as barely more than a breath. "Yes, that is exactly why I came." "Then perhaps your accident was not an accident at all. Perhaps it was providence or fate, or simply the universe's sense of irony that brought you to my door." He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look almost human, almost kind. "You said we are not so different, you and I. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps that is why I find myself wanting to offer you something I have not offered anyone in centuries." "What is that? A choice? You have, by your own account, perhaps 6 months left, perhaps less. You can spend that time in a monastery, on your knees, begging forgiveness for sins of omission from a God who may or may not be listening. Or you can spend it here in this castle outside of time, discovering what it means to truly live before you die. I cannot give you back the years you have lost. I cannot undo your choices or heal your regrets. But I can give you these last months, if you want them. I can show you things you have never seen, teach you things you have never known, offer you experiences that have been denied to you. Not as a seduction, not as a path to damnation, but simply as one lonely soul reaching out to another." Elspeth stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest with an intensity she had not felt in decades. It was madness. It was dangerous. It was everything she had spent her life avoiding. And yet what did she have to lose now? The cancer would kill her regardless of where she spent her remaining time. At least here, in this impossible place with this impossible creature, she might finally learn what it felt like to be alive. "I accept." Her voice was steady, surprising her. "I accept your offer, Count Dracula. Teach me how to live before I die." His smile widened, and he brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her withered knuckles with a gallantry that belonged to an age long past. "Then let us begin, Dame Elspeth Craven. Let us see if an old woman and an ancient monster can teach each other what it means to be human again, even if only for a little while." He rose and moved toward the door, then paused. "Rest today. Heal. Tonight, when the moon rises and I am fully awake, we will have our first lesson. I will show you my library, and we will talk of books and ideas and all the things you have read but never discussed with anyone who truly understood. Tomorrow night, perhaps, we will walk in the gardens, though they are wild and overgrown now. The night after, I will play for you on the organ in the chapel, music that has not been heard by living ears in 200 years. He looked back at her, and in his eyes she saw something she recognized because she felt it too. Hope, fragile and absurd and utterly unexpected, but there nonetheless. "We will fill your remaining days with all the life you can hold, Dame Elspeth. And perhaps in doing so, we will both remember what it was we lost when we chose our respective paths. Perhaps we will both find a measure of redemption, even if it comes too late to change anything." And then he was gone, leaving her alone with her thoughts and her aching body and the impossible lightness in her chest that felt almost like happiness. Outside, the sun climbed higher, cold and distant, illuminating a world that suddenly seemed full of possibility rather than endings. Elspeth lay back against the pillows and closed her eyes, not to sleep but simply to feel this moment, this strange gift she had been given. She was going to live. Finally, at the end of everything, she was going to truly live. And if the price was spending her last days in the company of a vampire, learning to be human from a monster who had forgotten how well, there were worse bargains to be struck, and she had already wasted 84 years being careful. It was time, she thought, to be reckless. It was time to discover what she had been denying herself all along. The day passed slowly. Magda came and went, bringing meals and helping Elspeth with the necessities of her recovery. The servant said little, but her eyes were watchful, and once Elspeth caught her looking at her with something that might have been pity or might have been envy. It was impossible to tell. As evening approached, Elspeth found her anticipation building. She had Magda help her dress properly, choosing from the clothes that had been brought from the wrecked carriage. The gown was simple, black as befitted a woman her age, but it was well made and it fit properly, and with her hair brushed and pinned, she looked almost like herself again. Or perhaps like a better version of herself, one who had not spent 8 decades hiding from life. When the knock came at her door, just as the last light was fading from the sky, she was ready. Dracula entered, dressed now in different clothes, a dark coat over a white shirt, and he offered her his arm with the same courtly grace he had shown before. "Shall we, Dame Elspeth?" She took his arm, feeling the cool strength beneath the fabric, and allowed him to lead her out into the corridor. The castle came alive at night, she realized. The shadows seemed less oppressive, the silence less heavy, or perhaps it was simply that she was no longer afraid. They walked slowly, accommodating her injuries and her age, through halls lined with portraits of stern-faced men and women in archaic dress. His family, he explained, the Draculs who had ruled these lands when they were still considered worthy of rule. Most of the paintings were centuries old, the faces frozen in expressions of pride and power, and the absolute certainty that they would endure forever. "We are all forgotten in the end." Dracula's voice was quiet as they walked. "Even those of us who refuse to die properly. The world moves on, and what once seemed eternal proves to be as temporary as morning mist. It is a lesson I have learned slowly, and at great cost." They arrived at a door bound in iron, and he pushed it open to reveal a library that took Elspeth's breath away. Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling, thousands of them, tens of thousands perhaps, in every language and on every subject imaginable. A fire burned in a massive hearth, and comfortable chairs were arranged before it, looking as if they had been recently used despite the dust that covered everything else. "This is my sanctuary." Dracula led her to one of the chairs and helped her sit. "Here I have spent more hours than I can count, reading and thinking and trying to understand what I have become and why. I have books here that no longer exist anywhere else in the world. Treatises on theology and philosophy, histories written by those who lived them, poems in languages dead for 1,000 years. I have preserved them because someone should, because knowledge should not die even if the bearers of it do." Elspeth looked around in wonder, her fingers itching to touch the spines, to pull down volumes and lose herself in their pages. "It is magnificent. I had no idea such a collection existed. No one does. The world believes Count Dracula is nothing but a bloodthirsty monster, and I have done nothing to disabuse them of that notion. Better to be feared and left alone than to be hunted and destroyed, because I dared to keep learning, to keep growing, to keep trying to hold on to some scrap of the man I was." He selected a book from a nearby shelf and handed it to her. It was old, the leather binding cracked with age, but the pages were still intact. Petrarch. His sonnets to Laura, the woman he loved but could never have. "I thought perhaps you might find them meaningful, given your own history of love unexpressed." Elspeth opened the book carefully, her eyes scanning the Italian text. She had learned the language in her youth, back when her father had still hoped she might make a grand tour of Europe. She had not read Petrarch in decades, but the words came back to her, beautiful and heartbreaking in their longing. They sat in companionable silence as she read, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional turning of a page. Dracula had his own book open, something in a language she did not recognize, full of strange symbols and elaborate illustrations. The scene was domestic, almost cozy, and Elspeth found herself marveling at the strangeness of it. Here she was, an elderly English woman with cancer and no future, spending her evening reading Italian poetry in a vampire's library, while the creature himself sat across from her, absorbed in some arcane text. It was absurd. It was perfect. After a time, Dracula set his book aside and looked at her. "Tell me, Dame Elspeth, what would you have done differently? If you could go back to your youth, knowing what you know now, how would you have lived?" Elspeth considered the question carefully. She had asked herself the same thing countless times during the long nights of her illness, but she had never had to answer it aloud. "I would have taken risks. I would have traveled beyond the approved destinations. I would have spoken to men who interested me instead of avoiding them out of fear. I would have danced and laughed and made a fool of myself without caring what others thought. I would have chosen passion over propriety, at least sometimes." She paused, feeling the weight of regret settle over her again. "I would have lived instead of merely existing. And love, would you have sought it, despite the risks?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. "Yes, I would have sought it. I would have opened my heart, even knowing it might be broken, because surely a heart broken is better than one that never beat at all, that never knew the joy and terror of caring for someone more than for yourself." Dracula nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I did love once. Before all of this, her name was Elisabetta, and she was everything good in the world, everything I was fighting to protect. When news came of my death in battle, she threw herself from the castle walls rather than live without me." He closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked ancient beyond measure, weighted down by sorrow, too vast to comprehend. I was not dead, of course. I returned to find her gone, her body broken on the rocks below. The priest said she would be damned for her suicide, that she would never find peace in heaven. That was when I turned from God. That was when I chose this path. I wanted the power to defy heaven itself, to storm the gates and drag her back if I had to. Instead, I became the very thing that would keep us apart forever. Elspeth felt tears on her cheeks. She reached out, not thinking, and took his hand. I am sorry. I am so terribly sorry. He opened his eyes and looked at their joined hands, her wrinkled and spotted with age, his pale and unmarked by time. We are quite a pair, are we not? A woman who never loved, and a man who loved too much. Both of us destroyed by our choices. Both of us carrying regrets that can never be resolved. Perhaps that is why we can help each other. Elspeth squeezed his hand gently. Perhaps that is the gift we can give each other in the time we have left. You can show me what I missed, and I can remind you of what you lost. We can be witnesses to each other's humanity, even here in this place of darkness. Dracula smiled, and this time it reached his eyes, making them almost warm. Yes, yes, I think that is exactly what we can do. Come, let me show you more of my collection. Let me share with you the treasures I have hoarded across the centuries. Let me give you something beautiful to fill these last days of your life. They spent hours in the library, talking and reading and sharing stories of their vastly different lives. He told her of battles fought and lands conquered, of courts he had attended and conspiracies he had witnessed. She told him of quiet evenings in the English countryside, of gardens she had tended and books she had read, of a life lived small and careful, but not without its own modest joys. And somehow, in the telling and the listening, they each found something they had not expected: understanding, acceptance, and perhaps, though neither would have named it so early, the beginnings of something deeper. When Magda came to announce that dawn was approaching and the master must retire, Dracula rose reluctantly. Tomorrow night. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. Tomorrow night I will take you to the gardens if you are strong enough. They are not what they once were, but there is a wild beauty to them now, and the moon on the overgrown roses is something worth seeing. I will be ready. Elspeth felt exhaustion pulling at her, but also a strange contentment. Thank you for this evening, for the books and the conversation, and the gift of being seen as more than just an old woman waiting to die. Thank you for seeing me as more than just a monster. He bowed formally, a gesture from another age, and then was gone, moving through the shadows as if he were part of them. Magda helped Elspeth back to her room, and as she settled into bed, her body aching but her spirit lighter than it had been in years, she found herself smiling. 6 months, the doctors had said, perhaps less. But here, in this impossible place with this impossible companion, she was beginning to think that 6 months might be enough, might be more than enough, if she spent them truly living. And for the first time since her diagnosis, the thought of death did not fill her with fear or regret. Instead, she felt only gratitude for whatever strange providence had brought her here, to this threshold between life and death, where an old woman and an ancient vampire were teaching each other how to be human again. The following evening found Elspeth standing before the mirror in her room, studying her reflection with an attention she had not paid to her appearance in years. The bruises on her face had faded to yellow and green, the cut on her temple was healing cleanly, and though her ribs still ached, the pain had dulled to something manageable. More than her physical recovery, however, she noticed something else in her reflection, a light in her eyes that had been absent for so long she had forgotten it could exist. Anticipation, excitement, the simple joy of having something to look forward to. Magda had brought her a shawl, heavy wool dyed a deep crimson, and helped her drape it around her shoulders. The gardens can be cold at night, even in spring. The servant's voice was neutral, but Elspeth caught something in her eyes. Concern, perhaps, or warning. You should know, Dame Elspeth, that the master has not walked those gardens with anyone since his lady died. Not in 500 years. Whatever is happening between you, it is not something he takes lightly, nor do I. Elspeth met Magda's gaze steadily. I know what I am, Magda, an old woman with death written in her bones. I know what he is, a creature damned beyond redemption, but for whatever time I have left, I choose to spend it learning what I should have learned decades ago. I choose to feel even if it brings pain. I choose to live even if only for a few more weeks. Magda nodded slowly. Then I wish you well, my lady. And I hope that when your time comes, you will have no regrets left to carry into the next world. The knock came precisely at midnight, and Elspeth found herself smiling at the punctuality. Dracula stood in the doorway, dressed in a long coat of midnight blue, his hair loose around his shoulders, in a style that made him look less like a nobleman and more like the warrior he had once been. He offered his arm and she took it, feeling the cool strength beneath the fabric and drawing comfort from it. They walked through the castle in silence, descending stone staircases worn smooth by centuries of feet, passing through corridors where the air grew progressively cooler and damper. Finally they emerged through a heavy wooden door into the night, and Elspeth gasped at the beauty before her. The gardens had indeed gone wild, but in their wildness they had achieved a haunting beauty that no carefully manicured landscape could match. Rose bushes grew in great tangled masses, their blooms pale as ghosts in the moonlight. Ivy covered ancient statues, giving them the appearance of green spectres frozen in eternal poses of grief or supplication. Paths that had once been straight and orderly now curved and wandered, according to their own logic, overgrown with moss that glowed silver under the full moon. And everywhere, the scent of flowers blooming in the darkness, sweet and slightly decayed, like beauty preserved just past its prime. It is like a cathedral. Elspeth spoke softly, not wanting to disturb the peace of the place. A cathedral to forgotten things. That is perhaps the most accurate description I have heard. Dracula led her down one of the wandering paths, his pace slow and careful, mindful of her limitations. I used to maintain these gardens obsessively in the years immediately after Elisabetta's death. I thought if I could keep them perfect, if I could preserve this one beautiful thing, it would somehow balance the horror of what I had become. But eventually I realized that perfection is a form of death, and I let them grow as they wished. Now they are more alive than they ever were when I tried to control them. They walked in silence for a time, and Elspeth found herself noticing details she might have missed had she been hurrying. A fountain, long dry, where stone angels wept over a basin filled with fallen leaves. A bench beneath a willow whose drooping branches created a private bower, secret and secluded. A sundial that had not marked the passage of time in centuries, its face covered with lichen and its shadow pointing nowhere. Dracula guided her to the bench and helped her sit, then settled beside her with that preternatural grace that marked all his movements. From here they could see much of the garden spread before them, and beyond it, the mountains rising like the walls of the world. The moon was enormous, hanging low and golden, casting everything in its otherworldly light. "Tell me about her," Elspeth spoke quietly. "Tell me about Elisabetta." For a long moment she thought he would not answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low and filled with a pain that time had not diminished. "She was the daughter of one of my vassals, raised in the castle from childhood. I watched her grow from a girl into a woman, watched her become kind and brave, and filled with a light that seemed to come from within. I loved her before I knew what love was, and when she was of age I asked her father for her hand. He agreed, of course. Who would refuse the prince? But Elisabetta, she made her own choice. She said yes, not because I was powerful, but because she saw in me something worth loving." He paused, his hands clasped together so tightly she could see the tension in them, even in the moonlight. "We were married in the spring, in the chapel here in the castle. She wore white and carried roses from these very gardens. I remember thinking that I had never seen anything so beautiful, so pure. I remember believing that God had blessed me above all men. I remember being certain that our love would endure forever, that nothing could break it, that death itself would not divide us." His voice grew harder, bitter with self-recrimination. "And then the wars came. The Ottomans pushed into our lands, and I rode out to meet them with my army behind me. I told her I would return before winter. I promised her that I would come back. She stood on the battlements and watched me ride away, and I looked back once, saw her there with her hand raised in farewell, and thought how lucky I was to have something so precious to return to. What happened? The battle was fierce. We fought for 3 days without rest, and in the end we drove them back, but at terrible cost. I was wounded, gravely, and my men believed me dead. They sent word to the castle that I had fallen, that I would not be coming home. Elisabetta received that message, and she could not bear it. She climbed to the highest tower and threw herself from it, choosing death over a life without me." He fell silent, and Elspeth saw his jaw working, saw the struggle to contain emotions that after 5 centuries had lost none of their power. I returned 3 days later, my wounds healing, only to find her body laid out in the chapel. The priest told me she was damned, that suicide was an unforgivable sin, that she would burn in hell for her weakness. And I who had killed thousands in the name of God, I who had waded through blood and called it holy. I looked at her pale face, and I knew that if this was God's justice, then God was a monster. So you turned from him. I turned from everything, from faith, from honor, from the man I had been. When the dark powers offered me immortality, offered me the strength to defy heaven itself, I accepted. I thought I would use my new powers to save her somehow, to storm the gates of hell and drag her back to the world of the living. Instead, I discovered that damnation is not a place but a state of being, and that I had damned myself far more thoroughly than any deity could have managed. They sat in silence, the weight of his stories settling over them like the night itself. Finally, Elspeth reached out and took his hand, feeling the coolness of his skin, the inhuman stillness of a body that no longer needed to breathe unless it chose to. I am sorry. I am sorry for your loss and for your pain. I am sorry that love brought you to this. Dracula turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw surprise and something else, something that might have been gratitude. You do not condemn me for my choices? How can I condemn you for loving too deeply? That was never your sin. Your sin was pride, was refusing to accept that some things are beyond our control, that some losses cannot be undone. But the love itself, that was the most human thing about you, and perhaps it still is. He studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to understand how this elderly mortal woman could see so clearly what he had been unable to see in 500 years. You are a remarkable woman, Dame Elspeth Craven. I find myself wondering what you would have been like if you had allowed yourself to live fully in your youth. What loves you might have known, what joys you might have experienced. I wonder that too. Elspeth smiled sadly. But I cannot change the past any more than you can. All we have is this moment, this strange gift we have been given. A few weeks outside of time, outside of the normal rules, where an old woman and an ancient vampire can sit together in a garden and speak truths they have never spoken to anyone else. Is that what we are doing? Speaking truths? Yes. I think perhaps that is exactly what we are doing. We are witnessing each other, seeing each other as we truly are without judgment or fear. It is a rare thing, that kind of seeing. Perhaps it is the rarest thing of all. Dracula stood suddenly, and for a moment she thought she had gone too far, had presumed too much on their strange friendship. But then he turned to her and offered his hand, and when she took it, he drew her gently to her feet. Come, there is something I want to show you. He led her deeper into the garden, along paths that seemed to exist more in memory than in reality. The roses grew thicker here, their thorns catching at her shawl, their scent so strong it was almost overwhelming. Finally they emerged into a small clearing, where a single rosebush grew, larger and older than all the others, its trunk thick as a man's arm, and its branches spreading wide to create a canopy of flowers. This was Elisabetta's favorite. Dracula's voice was soft, reverent. She planted it the spring of our wedding, said it would outlive us both and serve as a reminder of our love. She was more right than she knew. I have kept it alive all these years, fed it with blood when necessary, bound it with spells to ensure it would never die. It is perhaps the last truly beautiful thing I have created, and even that required dark magic to sustain. The roses were white, pure and perfect, each bloom the size of a child's hand. Elspeth reached out to touch one, feeling the silk softness of the petals, breathing in the fragrance that was somehow both sweet and sad. It is beautiful. Thank you for sharing it with me. I have never brought anyone here before, not in 500 years, but tonight with you it felt right. It felt like perhaps it was time to let someone else see what I have been guarding so jealously, to share this small piece of beauty with someone who might understand its significance. Elspeth felt tears pricking at her eyes, moved by the trust implicit in his words. I am honored, truly, to be allowed into your grief, into your memory, into this sacred space. It is a gift I do not take lightly. They stood together in silence, surrounded by white roses and moonlight, two souls united by loneliness and regret, and the desperate hope that perhaps, even now, even after everything, there might still be a path to some form of redemption. Finally, Dracula spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. What are you most afraid of, Dame Elspeth? In these final months of your life, what is the fear that keeps you awake at night? The question surprised her, but she answered honestly, I'm afraid of dying without ever having truly lived. I'm afraid that when I stand before whatever judgment awaits, I will have nothing to show for my 8 decades on earth, except a list of things I did not do, chances I did not take, feelings I did not allow myself to feel. I am afraid of being forgotten, not because I want fame or recognition, but because I fear I was never truly here at all, never made any real impact on the world or on another human heart. And if you could change that, if you could ensure that your last months were filled with all the life and feeling you have denied yourself, would you take that chance even if it meant pain, even if it meant opening yourself to heartbreak? Yes. The answer came without hesitation. Yes, I would rather feel everything, even pain, than continue to feel nothing. I would rather love and lose than never love at all. I would rather burn brightly for a brief time than continue to smolder in this grey half-existence. Dracula turned to face her fully, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Then let me offer you something, Dame Elspeth. Not immortality, for I know you are wise enough to recognize that as the curse it is. But let me offer you these months, these precious remaining months, filled with every experience you have denied yourself. Let me teach you to dance, though your bones ache. Let me show you art and music and beauty that has been lost to the world. Let me introduce you to pleasure, not of the flesh necessarily, though if you wish that too, I will honor that desire, but pleasure of the mind and heart and spirit. Let me help you truly live before you die. And what do you want in return? There must be something. No one offers such gifts without expecting something back. What I want is simple, and perhaps impossible. I want to remember what it means to be human. I want to see the world through your eyes, to experience wonder and joy and simple contentment without the taint of centuries of death and darkness. I want to have a friend, a true friend, someone who knows what I am and does not flinch from it, who can see the man I was beneath the monster I have become. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was rough with emotion. I want to matter to someone, to make a difference in a life rather than simply taking it. I want redemption, even if it is only the smallest fragment, even if it comes too late to save me from the hell I have earned. Elspeth reached up and touched his face, her wrinkled hand against his smooth cheek, and felt him lean into the touch like a man starved for simple contact. Then we have an agreement, Count Dracula. You will teach me to live, and I will remind you of your humanity. We will be friends, companions, witnesses to each other's journey, and whatever time we have, however brief, we will make it matter. We will make it beautiful. He covered her hand with his own, and she felt the tremor that ran through him, the sheer relief of being accepted, being seen, being offered connection without condition or fear. Yes, yes, we will make it beautiful. They stood that way for a long moment, human and vampire, mortal and immortal, two damaged souls finding in each other something they had thought lost forever. Then, gently, Dracula stepped back and offered his arm once more. Come. The night is still young and I have music to play for you. The organ in the chapel has been silent too long, and I find myself wanting to fill this castle with something other than shadows and silence. They walked back through the gardens, and Elspeth felt something shift inside her, some wall she had not even known existed crumbling away. She was going to die soon. That was inevitable. But for the first time in her life, she was also going to truly live. And that, she thought, was worth any price, worth any risk, worth the heartbreak that would surely come when her time ran out. The chapel was small, tucked into one of the castle's towers, and it bore the signs of centuries of neglect. Dust covered the pews, cobwebs hung from the vaulted ceiling, and the altar was bare of any ornament. But the organ was magnificent, a massive construction of wood and brass that dominated one entire wall. Dracula led her to a pew near the front and helped her sit, then moved to the organ with a sense of purpose she had not seen in him before. His hands settled on the keys, and for a moment he simply sat there, remembering perhaps, or gathering courage. Then he began to play, and Elspeth felt her breath catch in her throat. The music that poured from the organ was unlike anything she had ever heard, at once mournful and triumphant, a lament and a celebration, a prayer and a curse. She recognized the forms, the structure of Baroque composition, but the emotion behind it was raw and immediate, as if he were improvising from the depths of his tormented soul. She closed her eyes and let the music wash over her, feeling each note resonate in her chest, in her bones, in the very core of her being. This was what she had been missing all her life, she realized. This depth of feeling, this willingness to be vulnerable, to pour out pain and beauty and longing without restraint or shame. She had spent 84 years being careful, being controlled, being proper, and in doing so, she had missed the entire point of existence. The music built to a crescendo, then softened, became gentle and almost tender. When it finally ended, the last notes fading into the vast silence of the chapel, Elspeth opened her eyes to find tears streaming down her face. Dracula remained at the organ, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking slightly with emotion he could no longer contain. She rose, ignoring the pain in her ribs, and went to him. She placed her hand on his shoulder, and he turned to look up at her with eyes that glistened in the candlelight. "Thank you." Her voice was thick with tears. "Thank you for that gift, for that beauty, for letting me hear what is in your heart." He reached up and covered her hand with his. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for hearing not just the notes but the meaning behind them. Thank you for not being afraid of what I revealed." They stayed that way for a time, connected by touch and understanding. Two souls who had found in each other something both had thought forever lost. Finally, Dracula rose, and together they walked back through the silent castle to her room. At her door, he paused, and she saw uncertainty in his face, as if he wanted to say something but could not find the words. "Tomorrow night," Elspeth spoke softly, "tomorrow night teach me to dance. I have never danced, not properly, and I think I would like to learn before I die." His face lit with a smile that was almost boyish in its delight. "Yes, tomorrow night I will teach you to dance. We will have music and candlelight, and I will show you how to move to rhythms that have been forgotten by the living world. It will be my honor and my pleasure." He bowed, that courtly gesture she was coming to treasure, and then was gone, leaving her alone with her thoughts and her racing heart, and the echo of music that seemed to still hang in the air around her. Elspeth entered her room and prepared for bed, moving slowly, savoring each moment of this strange new life she had stumbled into. As she lay in the darkness, waiting for sleep to claim her, she thought about the irony of it all. She had come to these mountains seeking absolution, seeking to make peace with a life wasted. Instead, she had found something far more valuable. She had found a companion who understood loneliness and regret, who could teach her what she needed to learn, not through words but through shared experience. She had found, against all odds and reason, a friend, and more than that, she had found herself. Not the dutiful daughter, not the proper lady, not the pious woman seeking heavenly approval. Just Elspeth, raw and real and fully alive for the first time in 84 years. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was exactly what she needed. Outside her window, the moon rode high and cold above the mountains, illuminating nothing and revealing everything. Somewhere in the depths of the castle, she imagined Dracula preparing for his day's rest, perhaps thinking of her as she was thinking of him, perhaps marveling at the strange connection they had formed. Tomorrow night they would dance. The night after, who knew? There would be conversations and revelations, laughter and tears, moments of beauty stolen from the jaws of death and damnation. She would make the most of every moment. She would hold nothing back. And when her time came, when the cancer finally claimed her and death opened its arms to receive her, she would go without regret, knowing that she had finally learned how to live. That would be enough. That would be everything. Sleep came gently, and with it dreams not of death and darkness but of music and moonlight, and the cool touch of hands that had once been mortal, once been warm, but that even in their cursed state could still offer comfort and connection. She dreamed of white roses blooming in the darkness, and of a dance she had yet to learn, and of the precious, fleeting beauty of moments shared between two souls who had found each other at the end of everything. The next evening arrived with a sense of anticipation that made Elspeth feel almost young again. Magda had helped her dress in something more suitable for dancing, a gown from among the old clothes stored in the castle's many rooms. It was decades out of fashion, perhaps even a century, but it fit reasonably well, and the deep blue fabric brought out what little color remained in her faded eyes. The servant had even arranged her silver hair in a style that was softer than her usual severe bun, allowing a few wisps to frame her face. "You look beautiful, my lady." Magda's voice was gentle, almost wistful. "The master will be pleased." Elspeth studied her reflection and saw not beauty, but something perhaps more valuable. She saw a woman who had finally stopped hiding, who had finally allowed herself to want something, to feel something, to be something other than a monument to propriety and restraint. The lines on her face told stories now, stories of pain and healing, of fear overcome and joy discovered. She was still old, still dying, still marked by 8 decades of caution, but she was also, finally, alive. When Dracula came for her, she saw his reaction in the slight widening of his eyes, the pause before he spoke, the way his gaze lingered on her face as if committing it to memory. "You are radiant." His voice was soft, sincere. "That color suits you. It brings out the light in your eyes." She took his offered arm, feeling the now familiar coolness of his touch, the strength carefully controlled. "Thank you. I feel almost like a young woman again, preparing for her first ball. It is a sensation I never allowed myself in my actual youth, and I find it both terrifying and wonderful." "Good. Terror and wonder are close companions, and both are essential to truly living. Come, I have prepared the ballroom. It has not been used in centuries, but for tonight, for you, I wanted it to be perfect." He led her through the castle to a set of massive double doors she had not noticed before. When he pushed them open, she gasped. The ballroom was enormous, its ceiling soaring 3 stories high and painted with frescoes of angels and demons, locked in eternal battle. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their candles burning with that same too-still flame she had noticed elsewhere in the castle, casting a warm golden light over everything. The floor was polished marble, black and white in a checkerboard pattern, and along the walls stood mirrors in ornate frames, reflecting the light until the room seemed to glow. But what caught her attention most was the music. An orchestra played in the gallery above, though when she looked up she could see no musicians, only instruments moving of their own accord, bows drawing across violin strings, hammers striking piano keys, all producing a waltz that was both beautiful and slightly eerie in its perfection. "How?" She breathed the word, unable to form a more complete question. Dracula smiled, and there was a hint of pride in it. "Magic, of a sort. I have many abilities, some dark and some merely strange. The power to animate objects, to give them a semblance of life, is among the least terrible of my gifts. Tonight I wanted music, but I also wanted to be able to focus entirely on you, on teaching you, on sharing this moment without distraction. So I called upon old skills and older memories to create this." He led her to the center of the floor and turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "I should tell you that I have not danced since the night of my wedding to Elisabetta. That was 500 years ago, and the steps have changed since then, but the principles remain the same. Trust, connection, the willingness to follow and to lead, the surrender to rhythm and movement. Are you ready?" Elspeth felt her heart racing, felt the fear and excitement mingling in her chest until she could not tell one from the other. "Yes, teach me." He placed one hand at her waist, his touch light but firm, and took her hand in his other. She placed her free hand on his shoulder and felt the coolness of him through the fabric of his coat. For a moment they simply stood that way, and she was aware of how close they were, how intimate this position was, how she had never allowed herself to be held by anyone in her entire life. "The waltz is about trust." Dracula's voice was low, meant only for her despite the vastness of the room. "You must trust me to lead, to guide you safely through the steps. And I must trust you to follow, to move with me rather than against me. It is a conversation without words, a negotiation of movement and space. Are you afraid? Terrified? But in the best possible way. Show me." He began to move, and she stumbled at first, her feet uncertain, her body stiff with decades of holding itself rigid. But he was patient, murmuring instructions, adjusting his pace to match her limitations, never making her feel foolish or inadequate. Slowly, gradually, she began to understand the rhythm, to feel how her steps should correspond to his, to sense the pattern beneath the chaos of movement. "Relax." His voice was gentle. "Do not think so hard. Let your body remember what your mind has forgotten. We are made for movement, for dance, even at 84 years old. Trust yourself. Trust me." She closed her eyes and tried to let go of the fear, the self-consciousness, the voice in her head that had spent 8 decades telling her to be careful, to be proper, to never draw attention to herself. And slowly, miraculously, she felt something shift. Her feet began to move with more confidence, her body to sway with the music rather than against it. She was dancing. She was actually dancing. Yes, Dracula's voice held genuine delight. "Yes, exactly like that. You are a natural, Dame Elspeth. You simply needed permission to allow yourself this pleasure." They moved around the ballroom, their steps growing more assured, more fluid. Elspeth opened her eyes and caught their reflection in one of the mirrors. An elderly woman in an outdated gown, her face lined with age and pain, held in the arms of a creature that cast no reflection at all. She should have been horrified by the image, by the visible proof of what he was. Instead, she found it strangely beautiful. She was there, solid and real, dancing alone yet not alone, held by invisible hands, moved by an invisible partner, proof that sometimes the most important things are those we cannot see. "What are you thinking?" Dracula must have noticed her gaze on the mirror, that you cast no reflection. that I am dancing with a ghost, or with something that exists outside the normal rules of the world, that it is beautiful and sad and perfect all at once. I see myself so rarely that I sometimes forget what I have lost. The ability to see my own face, to recognize the man I once was in the mirror, it is a small price compared to others I have paid, but it is perhaps the one that reminds me most consistently of what I have become. Does it bother you that you cannot see yourself sometimes, especially now, dancing with you? I find myself wishing I could see what you see, could know if there is anything human left in my appearance, or if the monster is all that remains. Elspeth tightened her grip on his hand. I see a man who has suffered and sinned and chosen darkness out of pain and pride, but also a man who keeps promises, who honors old agreements, who tends gardens and collects books and plays music of heartbreaking beauty. I see someone capable of kindness and patience and genuine care for another's well-being. The monster is there too, I do not deny that. But it is not all that you are. His steps faltered slightly, and she felt the emotion coursing through him in the tremor of his hand. You humble me, Dame Elspeth. You see me more clearly than I have seen myself in centuries. The music changed, becoming slower, more melancholic. Dracula adjusted their movement to match, and now they were barely moving at all, simply swaying together in the center of the vast, empty ballroom. The moment felt suspended somehow, caught between heartbeats, between breaths, between one instant and the next. If things were different. His voice was so soft she almost did not hear it. If I were still a man, and you were not dying, and we had met in some normal way, in some normal place, do you think we could have been friends? More than friends? Elspeth considered the question seriously. If things were different, I would have been a different person. Younger, perhaps, but also more closed off, more afraid. It took dying to teach me how to live, took coming to the end to finally begin. So perhaps it could only have happened this way, in this impossible place, under these impossible circumstances. Perhaps this is the only version of events where we could have found each other. That is a sad thought, yes, but also a hopeful one. It means that even in the worst situations, even at the end of everything, connection is still possible. Love, if we dare to name it that, can still bloom even in the darkest soil. Dracula stopped moving entirely and looked down at her, his dark eyes searching her face. Is that what this is? Love? Elspeth felt her heart clench with an emotion so powerful it stole her breath. I think it might be. Not the passionate love of youth, not the romantic ideal of fairy tales, but something deeper, perhaps. The love of two souls who recognize each other across impossible distances. The love of witnesses, of companions, of two people who have chosen to see each other truly and to accept what they find there. I never thought to feel this again. His voice was rough with emotion. I thought that part of me had died with Elisabetta, that I would spend eternity alone with my grief and my guilt. But you have awakened something I believed was gone forever. I do not know if it is redemption or simply a new form of damnation, to care for someone I cannot keep, to love someone who will leave me far too soon. Then we will make the most of the time we have. Elspeth reached up and touched his face, feeling the smoothness of his skin, the sharp line of his jaw. We will not waste a single moment in fear or regret. We will love each other as best we can, for as long as we can, and when I die, you will remember that it was possible. You will carry that knowledge with you through the centuries. You will know that even in your cursed state, you were capable of connection, of caring for someone and being cared for in return. And will that be enough? When you are gone and I am alone again, will that memory sustain me, or will it simply be one more regret to add to the collection? I do not know, Elspeth answered honestly, but I know that it is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. I know that these moments we are creating are precious and real and worth whatever pain comes after. I know that you have given me the gift of finally feeling alive, and I hope that I have given you the gift of remembering your humanity. That is not nothing, my dear friend. That is everything. Dracula pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, hearing nothing because his heart no longer beat, feeling only the coolness of him and the strength of his arms around her. They stood that way for a long time, while the invisible orchestra played on, filling the ballroom with music that no living ears except hers had heard in centuries. Finally, he stepped back and looked at her with something like wonder. You are remarkable, Elspeth Craven. I have walked this earth for 500 years, have known kings and scholars, warriors and priests, and I have never met anyone quite like you. You look at the world with such clear eyes, such unflinching honesty. You do not lie to yourself or to me. It is a rare and precious gift. I have so little time left that I cannot afford the luxury of lies." She smiled sadly. "When death is measured in weeks rather than years, pretense becomes impossible. I must be honest because there is no time left for anything else. Then let us continue to be honest." He took her hand again and began to move once more, leading her through steps that were growing more familiar, more natural. "Let us use the time we have to know each other completely, to hide nothing, to reveal everything. Let us create something beautiful in this place of darkness, even if it cannot last." They danced for hours, speaking sometimes and sometimes simply moving in silence, connected by touch and understanding, and the strange alchemy that had transformed two lonely souls into something more. Elspeth felt her body tiring, felt the ache in her ribs and the weakness in her legs, but she did not want to stop. She wanted to hold on to this moment, to stretch it out forever, to never return to the cold reality of her approaching death. But eventually, even her determination could not overcome her physical limitations. She stumbled, and Dracula caught her immediately, his arms supporting her weight, as if she were no burden at all. "Enough." His voice was gentle but firm. "You have pushed yourself far enough for one night. Let me take you back to your room." "Not yet." Elspeth heard the desperation in her own voice. "Just a little longer. I do not want this to end." "It does not end." He lifted her easily, cradling her against his chest as a father might hold a child. The music faded as he carried her from the ballroom, the candles dimming until the vast space fell back into the darkness that was its natural state. "This is not an ending, Elspeth. This is simply a pause. Tomorrow night we will have other experiences, other moments of beauty and connection. Every night until you can no longer rise from your bed, I will be here. I will fill your remaining days with everything you have missed, everything you have denied yourself. This I promise you." She rested her head against his shoulder and felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care so much about an old woman you barely know?" "Because you see me." His answer was simple and profound. "Because in all my centuries of existence, you are the first person to look at me and see both the monster and the man, and to accept both without reservation. Because you have reminded me what it means to care for someone more than I care for my own pain and isolation. Because loving you, even knowing I will lose you, is worth more than an eternity of safety and solitude." He carried her through the silent castle to her room and laid her gently on the bed. Magda appeared as if summoned, though Elspeth had not heard any call, and began helping her out of the gown and into her nightdress. Dracula stood at the door, watching with an expression of such tenderness that it made Elspeth's heart ache. "Sleep well, my dear friend," he spoke softly. "Dream of music and movement, of beauty and connection, and know that I will be here tomorrow and the next day and every day after, until there are no more days left. You will not face the darkness alone." "Nor will you," Elspeth managed to say before exhaustion claimed her. "We will face it together for as long as we can." He nodded, and she saw the shimmer of moisture in his eyes, tears he could no longer shed, but that threatened nonetheless. Then he was gone, and Magda was settling her under the covers, arranging the pillows, making sure she was comfortable. "He loves you." Magda's voice was matter-of-fact, neither approving nor disapproving. "I have served him for 40 years, and I have never seen him like this, not even in the early days when he still spoke of his lost wife. What you have awakened in him is something new, something I did not think him capable of anymore, and I love him." Elspeth closed her eyes, too tired to be shocked by her own admission. "God help me, I love a vampire. I love a creature of darkness and death and damnation, and I do not regret it. I only regret that I have so little time to show him what that love means. Perhaps that is enough." Magda smoothed the coverlet with work-roughened hands. "Perhaps the fact of it, the existence of it, is more important than its duration. He has been so alone for so long. To know that someone can love him even now, even as he is, that may be the greatest gift you could give him." Elspeth drifted toward sleep, her body aching but her heart full in a way it had never been before. She dreamed of dancing in a ballroom lit by impossible candles, held by arms that cast no reflection, moved by a love that existed outside the normal rules of the world. She dreamed of dark eyes filled with centuries of sorrow, finding in her something worth cherishing. She dreamed of music and moonlight, and the precious, fleeting beauty of connection formed in the shadow of death. Somewhere in the depths of the castle, she imagined Dracula preparing for his day's rest, perhaps thinking of her as she was thinking of him. Perhaps he too was marveling at the strangeness of it, the impossibility of two beings so different finding in each other something essential, something they had each been missing without knowing it. Perhaps he too was feeling the bittersweet mixture of joy and sorrow that came from loving someone who could not stay. But for now, in this moment, suspended between sleep and waking, between life and death, between hope and despair, Elspeth allowed herself to simply feel, to feel the lingering warmth of his touch, to feel the echo of music in her bones, to feel the overwhelming gratitude for this strange gift she had been given. A few weeks of true living at the end of a life spent in careful death. It was enough. It would have to be enough. And yet, as sleep finally claimed her, she found herself wishing, hoping, praying to a God she was no longer certain existed, that perhaps, somehow, there might be a way for this impossible love to endure beyond the limits of her failing flesh. The night outside her window was deep and quiet, and the stars wheeled in their ancient courses, indifferent to the small tragedy unfolding in the castle below. But inside that castle, in a room lit by dying embers, an old woman slept and dreamed of love, while somewhere in the darkness, an ancient creature faced another dawn with something he had not felt in 5 centuries. Hope, fragile and precious, and almost certainly doomed, but there nonetheless, burning like a single candle flame in an endless night. The weeks that followed were both the happiest and saddest of Elspeth's life. Each evening brought new wonders, new experiences, new moments of connection that she hoarded like precious gems against the darkness she knew was coming. Dracula kept his promise, filling her nights with beauty and learning, and the kind of deep companionship she had never imagined possible. He showed her his collection of art, paintings by masters whose names were legend, stored in a gallery that had not been opened in decades. He read to her in languages both living and dead, his voice bringing ancient poetry to life. He took her to the highest tower of the castle, where they watched the stars wheel overhead, while he told her stories of battles fought under those same constellations, of loves lost and empires fallen, of the terrible weight of memory that stretched back across centuries. They talked of everything and nothing, philosophy and theology, science and superstition, the nature of the soul and the possibility of redemption. They debated whether God was just or cruel or simply absent, whether love could transcend the boundaries of mortality and damnation, whether the life she had lived before coming here had been wasted or merely preparation for these final, perfect weeks. And through it all, Elspeth felt herself growing weaker. The cancer was advancing more quickly now, perhaps accelerated by the exertion of truly living, or perhaps simply following its inevitable course. The pain grew sharper, harder to ignore. She found herself sleeping more during the day, needing Magda's help for tasks she had managed alone only weeks before. Her appetite faded to nothing, and her body began to show the ravages of the disease eating away at her from within. But she did not complain. She had made her choice, had chosen life over mere existence, experience over safety, and every moment of pain was balanced by moments of profound joy, of connection, of the overwhelming gratitude she felt for having found this impossible love at the end of everything. Dracula watched her decline with visible anguish. More than once she caught him staring at her with an expression of such desperate sorrow that it broke her heart. She knew what he was thinking, knew the offer that hovered unspoken between them. He could save her, he could give her immortality, could transform her into what he was, could ensure that their time together need not end. All she had to do was ask, but she would not ask, could not ask, because as much as she loved him, as much as she treasured their connection, she knew that immortality was not salvation, but damnation. She had seen the weight of centuries in his eyes, had heard the pain in his voice when he spoke of all he had lost, all he had done, all he had become. She would not choose that path, would not become a creature that fed on the lives of others to sustain its own endless existence. She would rather die human than live forever as a monster, even a monster capable of love. One evening, nearly 6 weeks after her arrival at the castle, Elspeth woke to find she could not rise from her bed. The pain in her abdomen was a living thing now, clawing at her from the inside, and her legs would not support her weight. Magda found her and immediately went to fetch the Count, though the sun had not yet fully set. When Dracula entered her room, she saw him flinch at the sight of her. She knew she must look terrible, her skin yellowed and stretched tight over bones that seemed more prominent every day, her eyes sunken, her hair lank and lifeless. She was dying, and there was no hiding it anymore. He moved to her bedside and took her hand, his cool touch a relief against her fevered skin. "How bad is the pain?" "Considerable." She managed a weak smile. "But I have had worse. The pain of never having lived. of never having loved. That was far worse than any physical suffering. Elspeth, his voice was rough, barely controlled. I can end this. I can end your suffering. I can give you eternity. All you have to do is say yes. All you have to do is let me save you. She squeezed his hand as hard as her failing strength would allow. We have talked about this, my dear friend. We both know that what you offer is not salvation. It is a curse, and one I will not accept. I would rather live one more day as a mortal feeling everything than spend eternity as something other than myself. But you will die. The words came out as almost a sob. You will leave me, and I will be alone again, and I do not think I can bear it. Not now, not after having found you. You will bear it because you must. She spoke gently but firmly. You will bear it because that is what we do. We survive our losses, we carry our grief, and eventually, in time, we find that the pain has transmuted into something else. Not happiness, perhaps, but a bittersweet remembrance of what we had. You will remember me, and you will know that you were loved, truly loved, by someone who saw all of you and loved you anyway. It is not enough. It is all I can give you. Tears slid down her cheeks, but her voice remained steady. Please do not make this harder than it already is. Please do not tempt me with false promises of forever. Let me die as I have finally learned to live, with honesty and courage and acceptance of what cannot be changed. Dracula bowed his head, and she saw his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She had never seen him cry before, had not been certain he was capable of it. But now, faced with her impending loss, his control had shattered. He wept as mortals weep with his whole body, with sounds torn from some deep place of anguish that perhaps he had kept locked away for 500 years. She reached up with her free hand and touched his face, feeling the wetness of tears on his cheeks. Do not mourn me yet. I am still here. We still have time, a little time. Lie with me. Hold me. Let us not waste what remains in grief for what will be. He looked at her, his face ravaged by emotion, and nodded. Moving with infinite care, he removed his coat and boots and lay down beside her on the bed, gathering her gently into his arms. She rested her head on his chest and closed her eyes, feeling the absolute stillness of him, the absence of heartbeat and breath that marked him as something other than human. But in that moment, he felt more human than anyone she had ever known, his grief and love more real than anything she had experienced in her 84 years of living. They lay that way for hours, speaking sometimes and sometimes simply existing together in the gathering darkness. He told her of his hopes for her, that she would find peace in whatever came after death, that she would be reunited with those she had loved in life, if such reunions were possible. She told him of her hopes for him, that he would find a way to forgive himself for his sins, that he would continue to seek his humanity even in his cursed state, that he would remember her not with pain, but with gratitude for the gift they had given each other. As night deepened, Elspeth felt herself drifting, the pain receding into a distant throb as her body began the process of shutting down. She was dying, she realized with a strange clarity. Not tonight, perhaps, but soon, very soon. The thought did not frighten her. If anything, she felt a sense of peace, of completion. She had done what she came here to do. She had learned to live before she died. She had loved and been loved. It was enough. Will you tell me about Elisabetta again? Her voice was barely a whisper. Tell me how much you loved her. Tell me she would be glad that you found someone else to care for, even if only for a little while. Dracula's arms tightened around her. She was the light of my life, the reason I fought and bled and believed myself blessed by God. When she died, when she chose death over living without me, I thought my world had ended. And perhaps it did, in a way. The man I was died with her, and what rose in his place was something twisted and dark and driven by rage rather than love. He paused, and she felt him turn his face toward her. But you, Elspeth, you have shown me that even in darkness there can be light. Even in damnation there can be grace. Even a monster can love and be loved if he finds someone brave enough to see past the horror to the humanity beneath. Elisabetta would have liked you, I think. She had that same fierce honesty, that same refusal to accept easy lies. She would be glad, I believe, that I found in you a reason to remember what it means to be human. Do you think we will meet? Elspeth asked. In whatever comes after. Do you think she and I will know each other there? I do not know what comes after, for you or for me. I only know that if there is any justice in the universe, any mercy in whatever god or gods may exist, then you will find peace and joy and all the things you denied yourself in life. And perhaps, if I am very fortunate, You will spare a thought for the monster who loved you at the end. You are not a monster." She spoke with what little strength remained. "You are a man who made terrible choices and has paid a terrible price, but you are still capable of love, of kindness, of sacrifice. That is what makes you human, not the beating of a heart or the warmth of flesh. The humanity is in the choices we make, the love we offer, the compassion we show even when it costs us everything." The days that followed blurred together in a haze of pain and morphia, of waking and sleeping without clear boundaries between the two. Magda tended to her with gentle efficiency, and Dracula remained by her side almost constantly, leaving only when the sun made it impossible for him to stay. He read to her when she was awake enough to listen, held her hand when she was not, and spoke to her of everything and nothing in a voice that was her anchor to the world of the living. One evening, as the sun was setting and Dracula had just returned to her room, Elspeth woke with unusual clarity. The pain was still there, would always be there now, but her mind felt sharp, focused. She knew instinctively that this was one of her last good moments, perhaps the last time she would be truly herself before the morphia and the illness claimed her completely. "I need to tell you something." Her voice was weak but determined. "I need you to understand what these weeks have meant to me, what you have given me." Dracula took her hand, his expression anguished. "You do not need to say anything, Elspeth, I know. No, you do not. Not fully." She struggled to sit up and he helped her, arranging pillows behind her back. "I came here seeking absolution, seeking to make peace with a life I believed I had wasted. But what I found instead was something far more valuable. I found you. I found love. I found at the very end what it means to truly live. And I need you to know that I do not regret a single moment of it. Not the pain, not the brevity, not the impossible nature of our connection. All of it was worth it. I will carry that knowledge with me." His voice was thick with emotion. "When you are gone, when I am alone again in this cursed existence, I will remember that I was capable of this, that even as I am damned and monstrous, I was able to love and be loved. It will sustain me, I think, or perhaps it will torment me. I cannot say which, but I will treasure it nonetheless. There is something I want to ask of you." Elspeth met his eyes steadily. "A final request, if you will grant it, anything. Name it, and it is yours. When I die, I want you to bury me in your garden, near Elisabetta's rosebush. I want to rest there, in that place of beauty and memory. I want to become part of the earth that feeds those roses, to be transformed into something that will bloom in the darkness. Will you do that for me?" Dracula's face crumpled, but he nodded. "I will. I will tend your grave as I have tended hers, will ensure that flowers always grow there, that your resting place is beautiful and peaceful. You will not be forgotten, Elspeth Craven. Not by me, never by me. And promise me one more thing." She felt her strength fading but pushed on. "Promise me that you will try to find your way back to the light, not to become human again, for I know that is impossible, but to remember what I have shown you, that even in darkness there can be love, that even the damned can choose compassion over cruelty. Promise me you will try. I promise." He brought her hand to his lips and held it there. "I promise I will try to honor what you have taught me, to be worthy of the love you have given me. I promise I will remember you not with despair, but with gratitude. I promise I will live, even in this cursed existence, in a way that would make you proud. Then I can rest easy." Elspeth felt herself slipping away, felt the world growing distant and soft around the edges. "Thank you, my dear friend. Thank you for giving me the gift of life at the end of my days. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for letting me love you." She closed her eyes and Dracula gathered her close, holding her as gently as if she were made of glass. She could hear him speaking, could feel the vibration of his voice against her cheek, but the words no longer made sense. She was drifting now, moving towards something she could not quite see but did not fear. There was light ahead, warm and welcoming, and the pain was fading, gone. Her last conscious thought was not of regret or fear, but of profound gratitude. She had lived. Finally, at the end of everything, she had truly lived, and she had loved and been loved in return. It was more than she had ever hoped for, more than she had believed possible. It was enough. Dame Elspeth Craven died in the arms of Count Dracula just before midnight on a Tuesday in late spring. She passed peacefully, without struggle, a slight smile on her lips, as if she had seen something beautiful at the last. Dracula held her for a long time after she was gone, unable to release her, unable to accept that she had truly left him. When he finally laid her down and closed her eyes, he found that he was crying again, great racking sobs that shook his frame and echoed through the empty castle. Magda came and helped him prepare the body, washing Elspeth with gentle hands and dressing her in the blue gown she had worn for their dance. They laid her out in the chapel, candles burning at her head and feet, and Dracula kept vigil beside her through the remainder of the night and all the following day, hiding from the sun in the shadows of the chapel, but refusing to leave her. When evening came again, he carried her body to the garden, to the place she had requested. He had already prepared the grave, had dug it himself with his own hands, something he had not done since he had buried Elisabetta 5 centuries before. He laid Elspeth gently in the earth, arranging her hands on her chest, making sure she looked peaceful and beautiful. Before he covered her, he spoke, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet of the garden. "You asked me to promise I would try to find my way back to the light, and I will keep that promise. But know this, Elspeth Craven, you were the light. You came into my darkness and showed me that even a monster can be redeemed, even if only for a moment. You gave me hope when I had none, love when I believed myself unworthy of it, humanity when I thought I had lost it forever. I will carry you with me always, in whatever passes for my heart, and I will try, every day of my endless existence, to be worthy of the gift you gave me." He filled the grave slowly, carefully, as if by taking his time he could delay the final acceptance of her loss. When it was done, he planted flowers around the mound, the same white roses that grew on Elisabetta's bush, ensuring that Elspeth would rest surrounded by beauty. In the nights that followed, Dracula found himself drawn again and again to the garden, to the place where 2 women he had loved rested in the earth. He would sit between their graves and speak to them, telling them of his thoughts and fears, of the world beyond the castle walls, of the weight of memory and the possibility of change. And slowly, very slowly, something shifted within him. The rage that had sustained him for centuries began to fade, replaced by a quieter sorrow that was more bearable precisely because it was shared. He had loved Elisabetta with the passion of youth, and her loss had destroyed him. But he had loved Elspeth with the wisdom of age, and her loss had transformed him. He began to make different choices. When travelers came near his castle, he no longer fed on them, but sent them safely on their way. When villagers fell ill or faced hardship, he left aid at their doors under cover of darkness, anonymous gifts that made their lives easier. He was not good, would never be good in any conventional sense, but he was trying, and that was something. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. The world changed around the castle, became modern and bright and loud, but Dracula remained, tending his garden, keeping his promises, remembering the 2 women who had shown him what love meant. He walked the line between monster and man, never quite one or the other, but something in between, something that had been touched by grace and could not entirely forget it. And sometimes on quiet nights when the moon was full and the roses bloomed white in the darkness, he would sit beside Elspeth's grave and speak to her as if she could still hear him. He would tell her of the good he had tried to do, of the lives he had spared, of the small kindnesses he had offered to a world that feared and hated him. He would tell her that he was trying to be worthy of her love, trying to honor her memory by becoming something more than the monster he had been. And though she could not answer, though she rested silent in the earth with flowers growing from her bones, he felt her presence nonetheless, felt it in the peace that settled over him when he sat in the garden, in the strength he found to resist his darker impulses, in the hope that whispered that perhaps in the end, even the damned might find a measure of redemption. Dame Elspeth Craven had lived 84 years and died knowing she was loved. Count Dracula had existed for over 500 years and would exist for centuries more, but the 6 weeks they had shared had changed them both fundamentally and forever. She had learned to live before she died. He had learned that love was still possible, even in damnation. And in a world that so often insisted on dividing everything into light and dark, good and evil, human and monster, they had found a space in between where 2 impossible souls could meet and recognize each other and choose, for however brief a time, to be more than they were alone. That was their victory. That was their gift to each other, and it was enough to light the darkness, if only for a little while, if only for the span of a human life, if only for the breadth of 6 perfect weeks when an old woman taught an ancient vampire what it meant to be human, and he taught her what it meant to truly live. The garden remained beautiful, tended by immortal hands. The roses bloomed white in the darkness, fed by the remains of 2 women who had loved the same damaged soul, in different ways and different times. And somewhere in the castle, in a library filled with books that chronicled the rise and fall of empires, Count Dracula read poetry by candlelight and remembered and tried and hoped. It was not redemption, not entirely, but it was something, and sometimes, in the darkness that was his existence, something was enough.